Hello, sisters. Welcome to the Sacred Medicine Podcast, weaving powerful, soulful practices into functional medicine. Step into this beautiful space of devotion and explore everything from nurturing foods, rituals, sexuality, and awakening your innate sensuality. It is time to own your radiance. This is the Sacred Medicine Podcast.
You are listening to the Sacred Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Margaret Romero, and this week we have a new guest, Dr. Diane Mueller, and she is talking to us all about fibromyalgia. Now, at one point in her life, she suffered from mold disease, Lyme, chronic IBS, and she completely was able to heal herself on so many levels. What she does today is help others to overcome, and she also certifies clinicians around the world in a mind-body approach to functional medicine. So today, it's so interesting. We are so like-minded in how we both practice medicine. And fibromyalgia, I think a lot of individuals who suffer from this are given, pain medication. They're given Percocet and all kinds of medications, prescription. And at times, what I have seen in practice for a long time, working for family practices and internal medicine, I've seen people becoming addicted. It's so easy to become addicted to these pain medications. So what we're talking about today is very different. We are not talking about Band-Aids, the conventional medicine Band-Aids. We are talking about true healing on a very cellular level. So we're going to learn all about how she did this, how she was able to overcome fibromyalgia. Do you know how common fibromyalgia is? I mean, almost everyone who has an autoimmune condition suffers from fibromyalgia. And do you also know how many people who are seen by solely conventional medicine practitioners are given pain medication for the rest of their lives, and they never get the root cause of why they have this illness to begin with, why they have this pain all over the body. But today, we are talking all about how to overcome it, what tests to do, what tests she did for herself. And a lot of these tests I do run on my patients as well. So this is a big topic. It's so juicy. It's so good. So stay tuned and on to the show. You are listening to the Sacred Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Margaret Romero, and this week I have a new guest, Dr. Diane Mueller. Thank you so much for being here today, Diane.
Oh, thank you so much, Margaret. I'm really looking forward to spending some time with you today.
So we're talking about a topic that has not been discussed on the podcast yet, and that is fibromyalgia. It's such a common symptom of chronic illness, of autoimmune disorders. So why don't we jump in and tell us a little bit about, your own personal journey?
Yeah, I'd love to. I really like sharing and talking about this from, first from like the impact perspective. So the way I'll start my story is that in the height of having fibro, the way I would start my days was I would wake up, and I think a lot of people with fibro can relate to this, is I would wake up and the first thought that would actually happen that would go through my head was actually a full body scan. And I would just be like kind of scanning in my head to see how bad the symptoms, how bad the pain, how bad the fatigue, how bad the achiness was that day. And essentially what I was like doing every morning was, am I going to have a day where I'm having a hard time making it to the bathroom and showering? Or am I going to have a day that's like still never a good day, but where I can actually go out and function in the world? And so the impact was, so severe because my day would really start by what can I do in the world today? What do I need to cancel? What can I keep? These sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead.
That's tough. I mean, I remember when I initially had been diagnosed with lupus. That's how I would wake up as well, in so much pain, and then trying to figure out, well, what can I do today? It was, yeah, it's a hard way to start the day.
It's a really hard way to start the day. And, it creates such a vicious cycle. Like I realized at one point the vicious cycle I was in, because what would happen, and now, knowing what we know in research, is like the moment I would have these thoughts around like, oh geez, how bad is it? How bad is it? How bad is it? I actually was then, subconsciously, those kind of thoughts we now know trigger adrenaline and trigger cortisol and trigger these hormones that are stress hormones that also impact things like our immune system and our immune system healthy functioning and our other hormones around our body and our digestion. And when we have these types of stress responses, we have more of a likelihood to end up with immune dysfunction and collect infections, which further worsen, the inflammation and the symptoms. And so I think there's just like this vicious cycle that I started to notice in myself and I see in my clients around the body and the mind, and waking up and seeing like, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. And that's my thought, and that affects my body. And then my body feels bad and it affects my mind. And it just, was a really, really vicious cycle to get out of.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So tell us, so how long did you suffer from this, and where did it come from?
Yeah, it was about a decade, just shy of a decade. And it was initially, like so many people, I had no idea where it came from. And it actually started when I was in naturopathic medical school. There were some signs of it before then, but that's when it got really, really severe. And when that happened, because I was in school, a lot just got blamed on school syndrome. These medical programs,
Stress.
as are so stress and late nights in the library and all these things.
Right.
And it really wasn't until I graduated and a lot of my colleagues were reporting like they were feeling great and their bodies were healing from the stress. And I was actually getting worse. And at that point, I started to do deeper digging. When I was in school, I ran a lot of tests, but nothing was enough to fully find any sort of true root causes. And I started learning a lot more about Lyme and mold illness. And as I started, learning more about fibro and understanding fibro as, one of the theories with fibro is really that it's the central nervous system that becomes so sensitized that a lot of things that are, say, inflaming our nervous system that would not bother a normal person, with fibro, what's happening is the threshold for pain is just so low that a stimulus for somebody with fibro is going to be a lot more intense. So I basically just started doing a lot of lab testing to figure out like, okay, well, what could all be inflaming my nervous system? What could be leading to this central nervous system sensitization? And that's when I found Lyme disease. I found a huge level of mold toxins in my body and in my house. And then when I did more investigative work, I had about a half dozen infections in my gut. I had all sorts of other toxins. I was just a mess.
Wow. Yeah, it's surprising when you discover all of these things. And in conventional traditional medicine, they're not doing the as an extensive Lyme or even checking for mold toxins or even gut infections. So typically someone doesn't feel good. And it's so common with fibromyalgia, from what I see in traditional medicine, that they do some blood work, everything looks fine. I don't know, probably you need an antidepressant. And that's like end of story. And the amount of testing is so lacking, I feel. So I'm so glad that you knew, obviously, because you're a naturopath, to do all of these extensive tests, which I think is just a huge, it's lacking in traditional medicine.
Oh, yeah. I really think, one of our biggest challenges with the current medical model is I think there is some sort of maybe fear, maybe is the right word, about people saying they don't know. And when it comes down to it, there's a lot of things I know about chronic illness, but when it comes to like what to do with somebody if they get in a car accident, like I have no idea. That's not my field.
Right.
And I think one of the biggest problems is we're trying to use medicine that is brilliant in acute care, and we're trying to apply that to chronic disease. And I think one of the challenges with something like fibro or, lupus, like you mentioned, is we get to a point where we get a diagnosis, and in the current model, then we think like, oh, we have a diagnosis, prescribe a drug and we're done.
Right.
Versus, in functional medicine, it's always like, okay, a diagnosis is more of like the starting point. Like, then we have to figure out why.
Why? Exactly.
Yeah. And that's the big difference.
Okay. So you found all of these things, and then what did you do next?
So basically, I just started working through things one at a time. I moved out of the moldy house, and that was really, really, really helpful. I also started taking every class and workshop and hitting PubMed and reading research and, doing everything I could on my own end, which once I moved out of the moldy house, my brain function really got significantly better. Like I still had a ways to go in my healing, but that alone made a real big difference for me as far as being able to do some of that research. And then I used because I knew the root, then I could apply research-based treatments to these sorts of things.
Sure.
So mostly using herbal medicine, supplements. I did use some low-dose naltrexone. So that was one of the pharmaceuticals that I did use. But other than that, I really just worked on all the causes around eradicating the infections, detoxing the mold and the other toxins, and then doing things that were really designed to say, build my immune system, reset my adrenal glands, and restore the hormonal balance. And that's one of the areas that I think is super, super important to mention, because one of the things I see that people get so excited about with like things like detox or infections is killing and detoxing, which is great. But there's another layer of it, which is that oftentimes these infections and these toxins, create so many imbalances in the body. The mitochondria don't work correctly. We're nutrient deficient. So it's also about, doing the test to say restoring mitochondrial balance, restoring nutrient deficiencies as well.
Oh, absolutely. Because somebody that has been ill for a while, someone who's got a chronic illness like fibromyalgia, I believe, that's chronic. People can have it for years, decades. Their deficiencies can be so severe, and then they just try to detox, but you can't. Your body just won't be able to handle it right away like that.
Yes, exactly. I think oftentimes we don't realize that detoxification is, it's a slightly inflammatory process.
Yeah.
And so being able to have the vitality and the strength to mitigate the inflammation that comes with detox is so important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So tell me, you said you also restored your hormones. What was happening with your hormones?
So there was a couple different things. One, there's 3 different types of estrogen, right? So there's E1, E2, and E3. Mm-hmm. So I had an imbalance of that where I had too much of E2, the strongest estrogen, which is also, which is good to have that. But of course, it's also more proliferative and cancer causing and those sorts of things than the E1 and E3. So I had an imbalance in those those three. And then I also had some progesterone deficiency. So that was, creating some PMS and some of those symptoms, and also explained to me why a lot of times the fibro was so significantly worse, right around the time of menstruation. So really working to help with the E1, E2, E3 balance, which I did using a lot of DIM, diethylmethionine, and then also by using some chase tree, as well as things like magnesium and zinc to help balance out that progesterone and estrogen balance.
Now, how old were you when all of this was happening?
I was in my 20s. So it was my late 20s. Yeah.
Okay. And so it's been, this has all been healed. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. Yeah.
It doesn't come back, or do you ever feel anything at all?
Every once in a while, yes. Every once in a while, I will wake up and feel like, oh, this is fibro-like. But if we would to put it on a scale of 1 to 10 and say oh, I had a lot of 9.5 days back then. On a bad day now, I would say it's a 1. Okay. So it's even if I have a more stressful time period, I will sometimes that's usually what tends to trigger, say, a small amount of it. But it's never come back to a way where it's impacted my day and where I can't do things or I have to change my schedule. So I'd say, I'd put it at myself at a 97%, recovered at this point. So I'm on zero medication, anything like that. So, if it's a 1.2 every few months, I have a day like that, I am, it's always good to continue to improve. And I'm still always working to, even improve those days. But compared to where I was, it feels miraculous to me.
Yeah, I bet. So what do you think contributes to those days, even though they're few and far between? Do you feel like it's a food that you ate? Do you feel like it's always stress related? Even the 1 out of 10, what do you think contributes to that?
For me, I definitely think it's stress related. I do think in general, to speak more broadly, I do think there's a lot of things, and I see a lot of things being potential triggers for what can cause that to happen in my clients. So certainly I do think that, somebody is really reactive to gluten or to dairy, and then they get that in their food. That can be a trigger for people, or they catch a cold, or have some sort of gut infection. So I do see as those as potential triggers for people. For me, I definitely see that the biggest thing I'm still working on is repatterning my mind and my thoughts and my beliefs. And it's so interesting. I see research on the perception of stress, where studies people are subjected to the exact same stressor, and they break them into 2 categories. And one looks at the stressor as positive or neutral, and the other has more of a negative Nancy framework to the stress. And what they see is dramatic changes, differences between those 2 groups and their stress hormones.
Right.
So, for me, I feel like I've come a long, long, long way from where I was 20 years ago when I started. I was not quite 20. I started working on my mind back in 2004, and my, thoughts and beliefs back then. So I've come a long way since then, but I definitely, it's still a work in progress. And I still have times where some of the thoughts I think are not positive and they're not healthy. And that I feel like is the biggest trigger for me personally, although I do believe that there's lots of different triggers that could cause that, that one type of day for people.
True. Okay. So let's just dissect this a little bit about some of the things that you did, and give us a little kind of rundown as to, how did you find the mold toxins, and there was mold in your home? Were you aware that there was mold? Let's just go through some of these things that you've done, so people who are listening who may be suffering from fibro can think outside the box. Because I think that a lot of people are given pain meds. They're just given like oxycodone, Percocet, things like that, to sometimes Celebrex, to sort of calm these symptoms, but nobody's ever looking at why they're getting it to begin with, which it bothers me so much that these poor people suffer. And despite them, now taking these narcotic prescriptions every single day of their lives, no one's ever really checking any of these things. And so give us a little rundown as to some of the things that you specifically checked for.
Sure. And I just want to comment too that it also really bothers me. One of the reasons I was so looking forward to doing this particular topic with you is I really feel like it's a real disservice to people with fibro when they're so frequently told that there's like literally nothing that can be done, because I think it shuts the door down for so many people. So I really hope all your listeners will, consider these tests that I'm about to talk about. And if there is any chance that there could be something here, I really believe it's worth looking for, for the individual. So to answer your question, from a mold perspective, one of the things to really hit on is from a like remediator or like mold inspector type of person. A lot of these mold inspectors that come into our house when, say, we're getting ready to buy or sell a house, those type of inspectors, many of them are not well versed on toxic molds for health. They're looking at mold, overall mold count. And one of the problems with some of, the ways that they're testing is that it's really looking at the mold count in general and not focusing on the molds that are actually problems. The other problem with that is with doing some like standard mold inspector is oftentimes they're just taking air samples. And the problem with air samples, is like they're valuable, but it's only one piece. And you probably know this of like the heavy molds, some of the really toxic molds like Stachybotrys, which is black mold, will actually fall. It won't suspend in air. It's too heavy. And it'll actually land on our surfaces and in dust and these sorts of things. So if these inspectors are just doing like a superficial level and just taking, dust or air samples and comparing them to the outside, which is commonly what they do, they can actually give people a false sense that their house is fine. So there's a test on the market called an ERMI. There's also a test on the market called a HERTSMI, which is just kind of a smaller version of the ERMI and a little bit cheaper. Those two tests are much better at actually properly identifying the toxic molds.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I do. I know all about the air samples that they come in to get. And sometimes they'll do actually, because I've had this done for my parents' home, they will get samples from the walls. Mm-hmm. If there is mold on the walls. But you're right. They could be, obviously, and carpets, I believe, are just loaded with mold.
Absolutely. And some inspectors do a better job, than others for sure.
Sure.
So there's definitely a different types of people, but the HERTSMI and the ERMI are pretty, for people that are just looking online, they're pretty good tests to look out for, because they have been really shown to be super good at identifying some of those human, mycotoxins, which are the mold toxins.
Sure. Okay. So, all right. So that was done. And did you actually see mold in your home?
Oh, yes.
You saw it? Yes. Okay.
Yes. Well, I didn't see it initially, but when I was actually renting it at that point in time. And so then I moved out and I had told the landlord what was happening. And luckily I had a very gracious landlord that believed me and that let me out of my lease at the time and all that. And then he actually texted me pictures when he pulled out the drywall of all the mold behind the walls. And then I was like very curious. So he actually he left the door open for me and let me go in. I wore a, N95 mask back then.
Yeah.
To go in and actually look around just out of curiosity. And it was everywhere, but I didn't actually see it until the drywall was removed.
I know, it's very sneaky.
It is. It is.
It's
And it's
scary
important.
because you don't know. You can't see it. And maybe you don't even smell it either.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say, is that it's a lot of people, I think they think like, oh, if I can't see it, or if I live in a dry environment, it's not possible. And the fact of the matter is, like, mold is everywhere, and we can live in the driest of climates. I'm in Colorado, which is pretty dry.
Yeah.
And I see so many people with moldy homes. So it really does not matter where you're at. It's always possible there could be mold there.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So that was the molds. And then what else did you do specifically?
Yeah. So I ran what's called a TGF beta 1 and an MMP9 on myself. Those are blood markers that will elevate with mold illness. So I ran those on myself. Those were elevated. And so that was a sign that not only was there mold in the house that I found, but that was also the sign that, okay, I was having a mold toxin build up in my body that was affecting and inflaming me. So I ran that. I ran tests for Lyme. And what I ran for Lyme was a combination of a PCR, where they're looking for the DNA, as well as a Western blot. And I used a different company than our standard, our classic companies out there. So a lot of times people just go through a company like LabCorp for Western blots. And one of the problems with a standardized company like that is they are looking for, say, like literally just one species of Borrelia, the bacteria that causes Lyme. And that's good. But there's actually, now we're seeing other research that's like, oh, there are some other species that actually can cause Lyme symptoms too. And so we can actually get, false negatives by using a standardized lab like that, because it's not as thorough as some of the other companies out there. So back then I used a company called Immunoscience. But these days, since then, I feel like there's better companies even on the market since then. And these days, I'm using a lot of Vibrant Wellness as the main Lyme company.
What about, I've never heard of them, because I typically, what's the name of that company? Oh my gosh.
IGenics or DNA Connection?
Yes, IGenics. Is that, I'm kind of hearing things here and there that's not that great. But I'm not sure because I haven't used them.
I mean, my feeling on IGenics, I used them for a while, and it's a Western blot, and they do look at a couple species. So it's definitely a step above LabCorp. But we're definitely seeing that some people can be negative on the Western blot, but be positive on a PCR when we're looking for the DNA. So The thing that I really like about Vibrant is that they're actually combining both types of tests. So they're looking for many different species. So I would say that IGenics, I think, is definitely better than LabCorp. It's moving in a right direction, but it's really still looking only for Lyme in one way versus looking for it in many ways. And I do see, because Lyme burrows so deep in our tissues. So, it's a bacteria that has like a spiral type of shape to it, like a corkscrew, which allows it to burrow really deep. And so that's the theory. That's like the working theory right now, as far as why some of the testing is not really as accurate as we would like, is because the samples are correct. It's negative, but it's because the Lyme isn't in the blood in the moment, and it's like deeper in the tissues. Yeah. So having different mechanisms of how to look for it, I think, is, one advantage that a company like Vibrant has over IGenics.
Okay. Good to know. I'll take a look. I'll look into that company.
Yeah, they're really wonderful.
Okay. So then next was lab work, or did you do the stool testing?
Yeah, I did the stool testing, and a point that I think is super important to mention here is oftentimes people do get, stool testing in conventional medicine. And, just for your listeners, I think it's really important that they understand that a lot of these conventional stool cultures are just looking for like the really bad, microorganisms, Salmonella, Shigella, like E. coli, the things that are like common with food poisoning. And there's a lot of other microorganisms that are, not from like the CDC's perspective as pathologic. They're not as big of problems to the body, but they still actually cause a lot of symptoms and a lot of dysfunction and a lot of inflammation. And those types of things are not looked for in standard, lab, like conventional stool testing. So even if somebody has conventional stool testing, it is really important to use more of like a functionally based lab where they're going to look for a lot of these other microorganisms. So what I was using a panel from, I believe it was Genova back then, which still has some good panels. I'm using the GI map by Diagnostic Solutions mostly today, but there's a lot of great stool cultures on the market. And I found H. pylori, I found blastocystis, I found Entamoeba histolytica, which is a pretty major parasite.
Wow. Yeah.
What else? Oh, another interesting thing that I found is I found C. diff toxins. And what's super interesting, like I never had that I remember, I was certainly never hospitalized for having a Clostridium difficile infection. But when we see like in research, which is super interesting, like certain people can go through C. diff infections, never have any crazy diarrhea, clear the infection, but toxin A and B actually remain behind. And toxin A and B basically will hang on to the intestinal lumen and to the enterocytes and or to the colonocytes, and it will actually cause dysfunction in the intestinal tract based not upon the infection, but the residual toxins that are left behind. Mm-hmm. So then that was another thing that came up. And I don't remember if it was toxin A or B. I don't remember which one I had, but that was another important part of the treatment, was clearing those toxins out of my intestinal tract.
How did you do that?
Saccharomyces boulardii. That's so far the only thing that I've seen in research that, can do that. There probably are other things that have not been researched yet, but that's the big one that I've seen in research to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So by the way, how did you pick up the E. histolytica?
That was on the stool culture.
No, I mean, how do you think you physically picked that up?
Oh, how did I pick it up? I don't know. I didn't really do much traveling out of the country as a kid. By that point in my life, the only other place out of the country I was in was Europe. So definitely not anything like, second or third world at that point in my life. I did a lot of backpacking in my late teens and early 20s before these symptoms kicked on. And so I don't know if it was like stream water, but that's usually not E. histolytica. That's usually things like Giardia.
So right.
I really have no idea. And that's always the interesting thing about these pathogens, or even, things like toxic metals, where it's like we can see these crazy levels in people. And it's like, we have no idea where this stuff comes from, which is, I think, why testing is so, so important.
Yeah, I did stool test. I do it actually now, maybe once or twice a year, just to be on top of things. And a few years ago, I found that I had Giardia, and I had no real symptoms, maybe a touch of constipation, but nothing at all what typically how Giardia presents. So I think a lot of people assume like, oh, I don't have any symptoms, so it's possible I don't have any parasites, but they do have chronic illness. And don't let that fool you, because I did not have it either. And I also had like a worm or something like that. In addition, like I had like several things going on, but I really didn't have any symptoms. So I just wanted to throw that in, because I think it could be, I think not having symptoms sometimes doesn't mean that you don't have anything going on.
I think what you're saying is so important. I agree 100 billion%, basically. I see that so commonly, that people are not looking in their gut because of that. And I heard a statistic once where the statistic said 50% of people with a GI dysfunction do not have a GI symptom. They have a symptom somewhere else. And I've never found a research, peer-reviewed study that actually is backing up that statistic. So I don't know if that's actually accurate, but I do feel like what that actually hints at is something I noticed clinically. And what you're, saying here is that for a lot of people, we don't know if we have a GI issue until we actually test. And I feel the same way. I generally these days run a stool culture on myself about once a year. It's what I recommend to our clients at our clinic as part of their maintenance plan once they're well. Like, let's just, run some blood work. Let's check on a few things. And then let's do a stool culture because of this exact, conundrum of there not being a symptom there. And then the connection so strongly to having a GI problem and infections and autoimmune disease is so big. So sometimes I feel like by doing that work of finding those infections there when we don't even know if they're there, symptomatically, is actually like long-term a really good strategy for preventing autoimmune disease.
Oh, yeah. Big time. I mean, I wish that stool testing was just like part of the, annual physical exam, like in conventional traditional medicine. It could just, okay, here's your kit, take this home, send it in, and then we'll review everything along with your lab work. I mean, that would be amazing. And It happens with, my patients certainly, but if it were more widespread, I think that there would be less chronic illness out there.
I 100% agree with you.
Oh gosh, there was something I was about to say. You were talking about the stool testing that you do it once a year and it'll come to me.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll come to me. Okay. So, all right. So you got the stool test and all of that was discovered. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Okay. I was going to say that I believe that every woman who is thinking about getting pregnant, honestly, I feel like you want to be in your just best health. And obviously along with blood work and all of that, I think a stool test, because God forbid you have a parasite and then you have the baby and you're pregnant. And then you're going to try to afterwards, breastfeed and all of that. And I just feel like if you've got a parasite, let's get rid of it. If you're going to have major surgery and it's going to happen in a month or whenever it's going to happen, let's prepare your body and get rid of all of these little chronic infections that could be lingering there. Because the last thing you want after a major surgery or having a baby is to have these chronic infections, which I just overall, nobody wants those things in their gut.
Yeah, I think it's so wise. And, even on top of that, I think that's a really good thing. And the other thing I would add is looking for toxins, especially things like toxic metals or mold.
Oh, yeah.
Because gosh, that's, some of that stuff can end up in the breast milk and, we're feeding that to our newborn infant.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I think is just even helping, the mother be as healthy as she can, which can, I believe, lead to, at least support a easier pregnancy. I think the healthier we are going into a pregnancy it's only going to help us. So as much as we can do, I really think it's very, very important.
It's just being proactive.
Exactly.
And it's just good to be able to do all of this test before thinking about pregnancy. Like you said, especially the toxic metals going into breast milk. It's just important to kind of fully cleanse, and let's start with a fresh new page when you're going to be bringing life. Now, of course, people, I don't know what happens if you've got a bunch of parasites in you and then you get pregnant. What happens, does it affect the baby in any way? I don't know if there's ever been any studies on that, actually.
Yeah, I certainly haven't seen any. Theoretically, I would be concerned that there could be potential, nutrient deficiencies that could, that could maybe affect things. But certainly, I think it's probably not the hugest deal as far as affecting a healthy pregnancy, in that, we have so many babies that are born. Most babies are born incredibly healthy without doing this. But right. I do think there could be something there if it was studied, where we might find that, if somebody is making sure that there's no infections and status is really high and there's no toxins. It'd be really interesting to look at things like, the first 5 to 10 years of childhood development and IQ and
Sure.
all sorts of various markers I think it'd be very interesting to study.
It would. Totally. Okay. So any other tests aside from that? So you checked for mold, you got blood work, you had Lyme testing, a stool test. Anything else?
I did. Well, I did do the, the hormonal component, like I talked about. I also did look for toxic metals, and I had minor elevation. I don't even remember what. I think it was lead, but I'd have to go back and see what metal it was particularly. And that was pretty minor. There was a little bit in there, but it definitely wasn't a huge portion of the problem. So I did that. I also did like a 4-time adrenal check and a cortisol check and DHEA. Yeah. So I looked at that, and I think and then small intestinal bacteria overgrowth was the other one that I had. And that was actually quite the journey of getting over that. I believe I had that probably started when I think this was when I was like 13 or so. I had a food poisoning, and I had it really pretty severe. I was sick for many days from food. And that's my guess with when the small intestinal bacteria overgrowth kind of first started, because I had a lot of constipation after that. And we now know that food poisoning is one of the top triggers for SIBO. Yeah. And that took forever. I had so much recurrence. I actually feel that we treat a lot of small intestinal bacteria overgrowth in our practice, and I've had one of the most difficult cases that I've actually seen. I'm better now, but it really came back a lot.
It can take a while. Yeah.
It can. And it just, goes to show so much too, I think, just like with the stool culture, why retesting is also so important to, even if we're feeling better, to say, okay, well, let's check our progress, because sometimes people feel better and they're still like, oh, a little bit of a residual there. We're not totally done yet. And if we don't completely eradicate some of these things, then we can, especially when it comes to infections, then we can just see them, continue to regrow and remultiply and these sorts of things.
Yeah, it comes back. It's kind of a pain, SIBO.
Yeah, big time.
Okay. Was there anything? I mean, that's a lot. And I think that this is actually pretty, what we just talked about is pretty much functional medicine at its best here with all this tests. And I think that, like, is TGF, TGFB, that's not something that any physician has ever said, you know what, we're going to test for this. I mean, let me backtrack. I don't have a primary unless I don't even know if I need to get a referral to something else is the only time I see one, but because I draw my own labs. But I just don't think that this is a test that's drawn on a regular basis.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is not. Unfortunately, a lot of these tests are not really looked for on a regular basis. And, I think that if my memory is correct, that's all the testing I did at that time. But one of the other kind of points I think to make with this is, for me, it was Lyme, mold, and, the GI stuff that I mentioned.
Right.
But what I think with fibro, as well as all diseases, I know is that it's really a unique combination of like what this is. So for me, it was these things, but for somebody else, metals might be the number one cause of their fibro. So that's where I think, testing is just so valuable, is that everybody's unique. So what's going to cause the disease, even if the disease is the same, is also going to be unique.
Right. Exactly. Everyone's different. Whatever their trigger is, everyone's trigger is so different. It could be, the mold, or it could be the Lyme, or a combination of things. And it's so different. So treatment is very different for everyone.
Yes.
All right. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I think that's kind of the bulk of what I did. And for fibro sufferers, I think the biggest thing that I really hope people are getting out of this is that there is hope, and that just because that you're told that there is nothing that can be done other than some of these pharmaceutical medications, I just really encourage people to think outside the box. Let me be proof. I see this in my clinic all the time where people told that things can't be reversed. When we actually figure out the why, we can reverse these things. So I just think it's worth it to, invest the time and the financial component of things to getting your life back. So I really hope people will, take this to heart, that they don't have to take the diagnosis as the end all be all.
Right. Absolutely. So how can people find you?
So a couple different things. So my clinic's name is Medicine with Heart. So you can find me just at medicinewithheart.com. I do also own, with my business partner, we own a functional medicine certification program. So if anybody's listening that's a clinician of any type and they want to be certified in functional medicine, you can find our online training school at mindbodyfunctionalmedicine.com. And then the other thing that I was really excited to share with all your listeners is I do have a book coming out this spring. Right now, the launch date is set to be May 6th, but there could be some change in that as we get a little bit closer. My book is about Lyme and mold. We'll go through a lot of root causes. And it really is, it's going to be a great read for somebody with fibro, because a lot of the root causes we're really talking about in there are also root causes of fibro. So if people, for the first 2 days of the launch, I am actually going to be giving the ebook away for free. And so Great. I have a website people can go to sign up to basically get an email that says, hey, this is the actual date. This is when the free days will be. So if people want to go to that website and sign up to be notified when the free copy is available, that I will give you that link to put in the show notes, but it's mwh.thrivecart.com/book. So it's a little bit weird of a URL. So I'll make sure to give that to you in the show notes. And yeah, if you guys are interested in that free copy, I would love to get it to you. I think it'll be super, super helpful. So just let me know if you're interested by going to that website, and I'll let you know when that date happens.
Great. So there's a sign in. So then you get their email, and then you email them and let them know what those days would be.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay, great. I love that. And are you on Instagram or any other social media?
Yeah, we're on Instagram. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn. So if you just go and, type in Facebook or Instagram, just type in Medicine with Heart, you'll find us. We do, and I do recommend that you do that. Our Facebook, we put in our Medicine with Heart channel. We launch a blog, a research-based blog, about every week. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but we average about once a week. And it's just a great free resource. And so if you sign up for our Facebook Medicine with Heart page, then you'll get the rolling channel, because our blogs get posted in there. And we've been doing it that regularly for a few years now, maybe 2 or 3. So we have a lot of great, content that's been cataloged as well.
Oh, awesome. Okay, great. I'll indicate that as well. All right. And are you having, what's the name of the book?
The name of the book is called Use Your Mind to Heal Your Mold and Lyme. And so it's really looking and addressing this whole thing that we actually started this call with, around like the vicious cycle of the mind and what we're thinking actually impacting the body, and the body impacting the mind. So it's looking at, we talk about lab testing in there, but when it comes to like treatment strategies for these types of inflammatory type of conditions, I actually do go through and look at a lot of the herbs and a lot of the research. And so I do focus on the body for part of it, but then I also focus on strategies, supportive care exercises, things that can be done on a daily basis that don't take a lot of time. I talk about how people can implement those things in their life. And so the idea is for people to actually realize and start working on the fact that, hey, some of these thoughts that we have as humans are normal. It's normal to feel negative about, what's going on health-wise. But unfortunately, even though it's normal, it can actually impact our well-being and recovery. So I talk about the research behind that, as well as how people can take 5 to 10 minutes every day to start to repattern and reprogram the way they're actually approaching life, approaching their disease, and then going over the research around how that can directly impact and improve the healing process.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Well, we will be speaking. So we're thinking May, right? For
Correct.
The book? Okay.
Yes.
Great. Well, congrats with the book.
Thank you.
I wish you all the best with that. And it's going to help so many people.
Yeah,
really
I really hope so.
Yeah. All right, Diane, thank you so much for joining us today and shedding some light on this very common and chronic issue, fibromyalgia. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me, and best of luck to you with all your work as well.
Thank you. That was such a jam-packed episode. So much great information. I hope you're able to take away so many nuggets from here, because all of these tests, they are available to you, not through conventional medicine, sadly, but the specific type of stool testing that we do is only typically run by functional medicine providers, and you would not see them at your doctor's office because they're special kits. You have to set up with the particular lab, and you need to have the kits on hand, and you need to know how to interpret it. And then you're going to need to know what to do when you have some dysbiosis or an overgrowth of bad bacteria, and what to do with it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need another prescription. And there are more natural ways to deal with abnormalities in stool samples. So my recommendation is to either seek a functional medicine provider. You can reach out to Dr. Mueller. I do these tests so much and so often. It's incredible. And I will tell you to date, I have never had a completely normal stool test result come back from a patient of mine. Not once. There's always something going on. So, and I do the test on myself, at least minimum once a year, if not two, every 6 months. Just because, you can get things from sushi, which I don't eat anymore, by the way. You can get things from eating out. You can get things from your pets. You can get things from food poisoning. Trust me, there's all kinds of bacteria out there. So my recommendation is that everyone should do a stool sample at least once a year, especially this particular one I'm talking about. It gives you 5 pages of information. It's amazing. Okay, so all the links and everything you need to know about Dr. Mueller will be in the show notes. Head on over to margaretromero.com/episode 167. All right. Talk to you all next week. Thank you so much for listening wherever you are in the world. I hope you are happy and healthy. And thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.